gang. We'll get started. I hear I'm the presenter standing in between you and going home. So hopefully we'll have some fun in the next hour, hour and a half, and answer some questions for you in regards to the new private applicator exam. So good afternoon, or I guess we're still good morning. Appreciate y'all kind of sticking it out. I just got home from the California Farm Bureau annual meeting last night and then headed up here today for the tail end of this conference. So it has been a bit of a whirlwind. Let me introduce myself. My name is Anna Genasci. I am the Director of Education and Communication with Stanislaus County Farm Bureau. But in a previous life, I worked for the County Ag Commissioner System as a pesticide inspector biologist. So that little white pickup that pulls up with the county logo that you all like to run away from, that's what I did for 5 years. And I found very quickly that I enjoy the education aspect and helping growers with compliance versus writing that notice of violation. So hence, here I am today being able to provide first off, some continuing education for those of you who have licenses, and secondly, some background and hopefully some test prep material to help you be successful in passing the new private applicator exam. So let's jump into that. So I always like to start out my pesticide training with a couple of things. One is the question, why do we use pesticides? To get rid of pests. And how are we getting rid of them, sir? We're killing them. Thank you for saying that. It's so funny now with this emphasis on IPM and now SPM, if you're following DPR, people say we control them or we mitigate, and they use all these really nice, kind words. But at the end of the day, we're using products to kill the pest, which means if we're not handling the product in a way that is safe for us and the environment, that there's opportunity for harm. And so I always like to just have a little refresher around that, because I think we talk so much about laws and regs and IPM that at the end of the day we need to remind ourselves that we're using a chemical and that we need to use it in a respectful manner. So why are we talking about the private applicator card, right? The little brown card. I have board members who have probably had that brown card longer than I've been alive. And now here I am standing in front of them and saying, you know, I'm sorry, you have to come back in and retake this test. And folks are wondering why. And the reason to that is we had a change at the federal EPA level. They changed the definition of what it means to be a certified applicator. And in order for DPR and thus then us in our counties to operate from a place of compliance, it triggered this new exam. So for those of you in the room, I'm kind of curious, how many people have brown cards? Okay, I got a couple hands up. How many people have like QAL, QAC, PCAs? Okay, and then how many of you are interested in taking the new private applicator exam? Okay, so we got a little bit of everything. So we have this change to the private applicator card, like I said, because of federal EPA changing their definition of what it means to be a certified applicator. And so it's triggered this new test. There's some good news, gang. I work very closely with our local ag commissioner's office, and the feedback that I'm getting from them is growers are passing at the same passing rate, if not higher, than the last test. So for those of you who are maybe nervous test takers and like, oh, my Lansing and I have not taken a test since I was in high school or college, and you're not looking forward to this experience, just know that growers are doing really well on the test. In fact, we just proctored the exam at California Farm Bureau's annual meeting. I had 9 growers who were brave enough to stay and take the test in real time after finishing this test prep with me, and all 9 of them passed. Okay, so feel confident about going into that. So that's the regulation that I have up there that I'm showing you is, so federal EPA changed the definition, and the trickle-down effect of that is all of us needing to retake that exam. So you might be wondering, well, when do I need to do this? Because our brown cards are on a rolling 3-year continuing education cycle, right? So as it stands today, you can renew your brown card in one of 2 ways, with continuing education, or you can retake the exam every 3 years, right? I am very much an advocate for coming in and getting CE classes. If you're going in and taking the exam, whether new or old, you're not privy to any of the new information that's out there. And as you know, I'm sure you've been attending classes all week, DPR is changing the rules at a very rapid speed right now, and in order for us as an industry to operate from a place of compliance, we have to keep a pulse on what those changes are, right? I feel like I'm always balancing two priorities. One, I want you all to go home happy, healthy, and whole. I want your employees to go home happy, healthy, and whole. And two, I want you to be able to operate from a place of compliance so that you can do what you love to do, which is probably farming and not taking private applicator test prep classes. So just the same way that our private applicator card rolls out in a 3-year span, so is the test. So DPR is giving us some time to adjust to the changes, right? So if you are R through Z and you are expiring December 31st of this year, you can actually go in before the 31st and renew with CE credit, okay? You don't necessarily have to take the new exam yet. My 2 cents on that is rip that Band-Aid off and get in there and take that new test, okay? You don't want to get into a position where you're not able to renew your permit because you haven't taken the new exam and all of a sudden there's product that you can't have delivered to your place that you need to get on your crops in your fields, okay? Last names A through H are December 31st of 2024, and then following I through Q, December 31st of 2025. So in looking in that, there's some folks in here that are like, oh, and I got a couple years, no problem. But what's that little line at the bottom I have there? But, right? There's always a but. Very similarly to the way that our PCA cards are, our QALs, our QACs, right? Those have subcategories, right? You go in, you pass your laws and regs test, and then you take your, plant ag or fumigants. The private applicator card now has, for the very first time, a category of its own. So the private applicator card, you can think of it as the laws and regs piece of it. And then if you want to use a fumigant that serves as a rodenticide, you have to take the subcategory. And this is new. For those of us that just have the private applicator card and not a DPR issued license, this is new for us. So the reason that I had that big but on the last slide is, regardless of where your name falls in the alphabet, if you want to use a fumigant as a rodenticide beginning January 1st of 2024, you have to have that new subcategory. And they will not allow you to take that rodenticide subcategory until you pass the new private applicator exam. So in theory, is it being rolled out over 3 years? Absolutely. But if you're one of the ones that needs to use aluminum phosphide in your orchard, you actually need to get in, take that new exam, pass it successfully, which hopefully I'm arming you with those tools today, and then take the subcategory, which is the rodenticide class. So does that make sense? Is that clear? I'm a very interactive speaker, so I'm fine with folks. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So, I have to put out, I call it blue oatmeal.
Is dipassidone?
Yeah. So that's not.
It's not a fumigant. Yeah, that's an anticoagulant bait. But if you're using phostoxin, right, the silver can with the little tablets that we throw into the active holes, that would fall under this new regulation. Yeah, great question. All right, so some of you are like, okay, Anna, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to listen to you for an hour and a half, you're going to help me pass the test, but when I leave here, because I'm so tired, I've been at a conference for days, I'm not going to remember anything. What can I do to help get ready for the new test? Well, UCIPM has put out a new study guide for us. So I was having a conversation with somebody before the class started, and he's like, oh, I have the study guide. And I said, are you talking about the little 5x7 yellow book? And he's like, yeah. I said, throw that bad boy away. It's very old. The laws and regs in it are not accurate anymore. I would hate for you to study that and then go into the test with the wrong information. So in the meantime, UCIPM has put out a new study manual. Those are the QR codes that I have for you up on the screen right there. It's available in English and Spanish, and a hard copy or an electronic copy. I like the feel of paper, so I purchased the electronic copy thinking I could just print it out and then mark it all up with my highlighter and all that. Nope, they've got a lock on it. So if you want to get the electronic copy, that's fine. Just be prepared to review it on your screen, okay? You can't print that bad boy. However, you can order an actual hard copy of it. And It kind of feels like a college textbook gang. I mean, it's a hefty amount of literature. But what I've done for you today is I've taken those 12 chapters that are in that book and I've broken them down into this presentation. And I'm happy to take questions too as we move through. Does anybody else need this up for a hot second? We're good. Okay. All right, so chapter 1, pest management, integrated pest management. If you're following DPR right now, we've been talking a lot about SPM, sustainable pest management, and DPR's goals for us as an industry in terms of reduction of pesticide use and in some cases elimination. That is not addressed in this exam, right? Those are new priorities for DPR. We are still talking about IPM when it comes to this exam. So integrated pest management. There's some definitions there for you. Pest prevention, cultural practices, pest exclusion, pesticide, the actual applications. So let's dig into that a little bit. The first one is biological control, right? Use of living agents to control pests. The perfect example for me always is I think about my roses in my backyard. If we have an infestation of aphids, we can put some ladybugs out. They're a natural enemy. They'll drop the aphid population. Just this last week at the conference that I was attending, I had Jacqueline from Parabug come in, and they are literally doing this type of pest control work, but in large scales, where they're having a drone fly over your orchards and drop beneficial pests. And this is an IPM tool, right? None of these are like what I want to say, I can't think of the word now, but it's not the only tool that we need to use, right? IPM is this collection of tools that we have to help manage pests in our orchard. Chemicals is one of those tools, right? But we also want to be familiar with the biological control. Of course, chemical control is use of pesticides. When that threshold gets to a place that we're going to see a negative economic impact, then that's typically when we bring out the big guns and we knock down that pest pressure with our pesticides. Mechanical control. Give me an example. What's mechanical control? You can read the definition if you want to get a hint. Yeah, burning. It would be literally removing the environment in which is hosting the pest. The story I like to tell here is, as I was working as an inspector for Stanislaus County, part of my job was taking abatement complaints, right? So I would get a call from a grower, hey, Anna, the field next to me is harboring, squirrels or gophers, and they're coming in and they're tearing up my drip line and they're eating all my almonds. What can the county ag commissioner's office do about it? And so we had an abatement protocol in our county that gave us the jurisdiction to go out and kind of look at the situation, assess, and then provide some information to the grower harboring the pests. So I get this call. Anna, the squirrels are terrible. They're eating 7 rows of my almonds. Something has to be done. I've talked to my neighbor. He's refusing to do anything. I go out there, and not only is he not farming his acreage, right? So it's just kind of sitting there, dormant, right? So squirrels have been able to build their, Taj Mahal of tunnels, but there is also this huge pile of broken concrete that the squirrels are weaving in and out of. So what is that concrete providing those squirrels? Shelter, right? Do they need to worry about any predators when they're underneath that big pile? Heck no, right? So one of the very first things that I suggested to the grower not actively farming at the time is, let's get that concrete out of there. Let's disrupt their, ability to live without any predators. And it was helpful, not the only step that we had to take, but it was one of the steps we needed to take. So that's a great example of mechanical control. And then last but not least is cultural control. And you'll notice there, the example that I give is winter sanitation, right? It's what you guys are already doing. We're knocking those mummies down during the winter months so that they don't harbor pests over winter, and then we're, in a situation come next year where we have all this damage, right? So I've got a couple checkpoints in here for you just to make sure that you're staying awake with me. I know we're like right in the middle of the lunch hour. So this question is straight from that textbook. And hopefully it'll give you an idea of what to expect on the exam. I haven't taken the exam myself, full disclosure. I don't want DPR thinking that I'm coming in here and just giving you the answers. So as I mentioned before, I've just taken that test prep book and broken it down into chapters for you today. What I'm hearing though back from growers is the questions are very straightforward. They're not like going in and taking the DMV test. So I'm appreciative of that. So chapter 1, one of the questions out of the book, the term used to describe a pest that becomes a problem after the main pest is controlled is called a what? Don't all yell it out at the same time now. I heard it. Secondary pest. Ding, ding, ding. Good job. All right, chapter 2, pest identification, understanding their biology and life cycles. Why is this important? Why do we need to know what we're tackling? Yeah, so we're choosing the right tool for the job, right? And so you mentioned the defacinone earlier, right? The scatter bait, which is an anticoagulant, that stuff is not very effective when there's nuts on the trees, right? Because if you're a rodent, and you're picking between the bait on the ground or the beautiful nut hanging in the tree, what are you going to eat? They're going to go after the nut, right? So knowing what pest it is that we're trying to target, kind of the nature of their life cycle, and then in some cases there are different times of year, a different time of the year that an application would be effective and times of the year when it's not. So this chapter is all about how do we identify the pest, what are the tools available for us in order to tackle them, at what point in their life cycle do we want to hit them, right? And then really, gang, thinking about you know your fields and orchards better than anybody else, right? You know your hot spots. You know when you're going to have an uptick in pest prevention. And so taking all of that into consideration before you make that choice about a pesticide use or biological control or whatever it may be. We have a whole gamut of people in our network now that can help us with these things, right? So say you've noticed a pest, maybe it's a new pest, maybe it's a pest at a higher concentration than we've experienced before. That's definitely what we had to deal with this year. We have resources, right? We have cooperative extension agents, we have PCAs, we have CCAs. Many county ag commissioners' offices now employ an entomologist. So say you come across a bug or insect in your orchard and you're like, oh my lands, I have not seen this before. You can actually bring that bad boy in and have it identified. And then you can work with your PCA or CCA to help you come up with a plan to knock it down. All right, obviously we've got different types of pesticides. Couple just like key definitions here is the route in which the pesticide does the killing. Right? So is it a contact pesticide where it literally has to hit the leaf of the plant, or in this case, the orchard, the tree, or is it systemic where the plant is taking it in, right? Knowing that route of control. What is an adjuvant? Yeah, it's an enhancement, right? We're adding different things, spreader, sticker, right? All these different types that will add to that tank mix to make its efficacy higher, right? So you may see that word on the quiz or the exam, and they're going to want to make sure that you know the definition of that. Now, sitting off to the side of that definition, I have this brightly like red, orange, yellow box here that has got some keywords in it: caution, warning, danger, and danger, poison. Where are you going to find these words? On the label. Ding, ding, ding. And they're telling me what about the product? It's toxicity. I think you could take the test right now. I think you'd be just fine. So it's not that caution isn't toxic, right? It's that it's less toxic than a danger product, right? So we still, again, are going to use these products with caution, wearing appropriate personal protective equipment, reviewing the label, but a caution material, it's going to take a whole heck of a lot more to do the same damage that a danger material would use, okay? All right, chapter 3. A pesticide is defined as any substance used to control a pest, only those chemicals registered for use in California, or certain pest control products derived from natural sources. There you go. Good job. So how are you feeling about the questions so far? Fine, you got this. You could take the test too. Thanks for the feedback. All right, chapter 4, laws and regs. Couple of things here, gang. I just did this class at the conference I came from, and I was reviewing this slide and said, the label's the law. That includes application rates. That includes PPE. And the grower in the room said, well, not for me. I'm the owner-operator. I don't have to wear PPE. How do we feel about that statement? It's not true. It's a little bit of a gray area, though, right? Because we actually have 2 buckets in which PPE live. One is the label. The label's the law. It doesn't matter who you are. The head honcho, the owner-operator, the CEO of a large organization. If you are applying that pesticide, if you are a handler, you have to wear the PPE that the label calls for. But the other bucket sitting over here that we have to be aware of is, what does California Code of Regulations say? Title III, CCR. There's a whole subsection, the 6700 series, that speak to employee-specific regulations. And embedded in that code is additional PPE requirements. So if you're the head honcho, you're the owner-operator, you have some exemptions from the California Code of Regulations, but you have to wear what the label says, okay? The label is the law. Now, if you're an employee and you're doing work as a handler, you have to wear what the label says plus what the California Code of Regulations says. So for those of you that are sitting in the room and you're the employer or you're the person doing the training for your pesticide handlers, you have been, deemed responsible for knowing what both of these buckets say, what the label requires and what California Code of Regulation requires, okay? How many people have heard about the 6700 series before? And they know that those are employee-specific codes? I see like a head nodding yes, but mostly I see heads saying no. See, this is why I feel like the Ag Commissioner's Office, they need to get out, they need to do these CEs, because if you're the person in charge of the folks that are handling pesticides, that is an area of the code that you should be familiar with, right? Because it's telling you as an employer, the expectation is that you are providing this information and these safety requirements. And they're all embedded in that 6700 series. So if you learn nothing else from Anna today, take that code home with you, okay? We're gonna talk a little bit about safety data sheets. I think of those bad boys as the label part 2, right? The first part of the label is the label that's actually on your container. You're gonna find general safety information there. You're gonna find the PPE requirements there. It's gonna tell us at what rate we have to go, depending on the crop that we're spraying. But a safety data sheet is like a label part 2, right? It used to be called what? Our SDSs were formerly known as MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheet. For some reason, a few years back, we decided to simplify the process, drop the M. They're all SDSs now. And the one nice thing that came out of that program is all SDSs are in the same format. So it doesn't matter what product we're talking about, every SDS will have the same 16 sections, which is nice for us as applicators, that we can go in and we can find that type of information quickly. We're going to touch on hazard communications. I have some pictograms for you. We're going to talk about the different types of permits and then pesticide use reporting. So here's just a dummy label. I want to make a couple of comments here. If a product is federally restricted, okay, EPA, US EPA has deemed it a restricted material, it's going to say restricted material on the label. Okay, but here we are operating in the beautiful state of California, and we have this additional layer of code, California Code of Regulations, and DPR has their own list of California restricted materials, right? And it doesn't necessarily jive with the federal restricted materials. So it is assumed that you all know this, and that a federally restricted material says it on the label, and the way that we know if a material is California restricted is because we have to look at the active ingredient on that label and compare it to DPR's list of California restricted materials. Now, what happens when we're using a California restricted material? What's the other paperwork requirement that's triggered? An NOI, notice of intent, right? We use so many acronyms in safety. Notice of intent in general is due 24 hours prior to application. Now, some counties may have permit conditions that they say, nope, we need a little more time. We want to be able to get out and do a pre-site if you're doing a fumigation, and they might ask for 96 hours. I know that Stanislaus County recently changed their permit conditions. Growers were submitting an NOI on a Saturday for a Sunday application. So by the letter of the law, they were allowing 24 hours, but there wasn't anybody there to review them. So Stanislaus County went in, updated their permit requirements, and so now if you want to do an application on the weekend, you have to get it in on Friday. You got to get the NOI in so that they have time to do a pre-site, if they so choose. Couple things on the label here. The brand name. Does Reckon LV tell me anything about this product? No, it's just the manufacturer's stab at marketing, right? Does the active ingredient tell me something about the product? Absolutely. The active ingredient, think about that word, active, that is the product, that is the chemical in the product that's doing the killing. That is the active ingredient. So if I were to say Roundup to you, would you know what label to go grab? Probably not. If I said glyphosate to you, would you know what label to go grab? There are probably, last time I asked this question, there are about 240 registered pesticides in the state of California whose active ingredient is glyphosate. The only way that you can go grab the specific one that I'm requesting that you grab is if you look at the EPA registration number. So think about that number as that specific product's fingerprint. It is unique to that product, okay? So when we throw around things like Roundup, I heard somebody ask about Paraquat earlier, there are multiple brand names whose active ingredient is that chemical, right? So if we're gonna find the exact one that Anna's requesting right now, you gotta find that fingerprint, which is our EPA number on there. Let's talk a little bit about the formulation, right? When I'm training brand new pesticide handlers, I ask them to kind of step back from all this jargon, right? We've gone over some vocabulary and acronyms and all this, and think about the logic behind it, right? If I give you a 2.5 gallon container and it's liquid, am I going to apply that differently than a scatter bait? Yeah, absolutely, right? It makes sense. So when I'm training my handlers, I ask them to kind of step back from all this jargon and really look at, the common sense behind it. Okay, we talked about the label is the law. Our SDS is our 16th section, label part 2. You will find information on an SDS that in regards to like first aid procedures, what to do if your chemical storage shed catches on fire, how do you clean it up in a safe manner and dispose of it in case there's a spill. Okay, that's the type of information that you'll find on an SDS. And then we've got this whole hazard communication, right? How are we communicating to our employees about the hazards at the work site? And in this particular case, the pesticide's the hazard, right? We established at the very beginning of the class that the pesticide can do killing. And if not handled appropriately by us, the handlers, or field workers, right, folks that are working in an area where the pesticide has been used, it can cause harm. So we want to make sure that we're communicating very clearly to the folks who are on our property what the hazards are associated with the work that they're doing. And one of the ways that we've done this is, like I had a hand in this, is there's this global pictogram system. So the powers that be decided, gosh, we need to have something that can communicate the hazard in a way that can be absorbed by anyone, regardless of native language, regardless of education level. We wanted to be really clear, and they came up with this set of 9 pictograms. Now, I'm kind of way up here, so I can't point. My favorite one, as a child of the 80s, having grown up playing Super Mario Brothers, is, on my end, it's the top right-hand corner. On your end, it's the top left-hand corner, the exploding bomb, okay? If you see that pictogram on a chemical or labeled any other kind of cylinder, what is that telling you about the product? I heard somebody say it. It's an explosive. Thank you, Michael. It's an explosive. How about the flame? What is that telling us? It's flammable. The oxidizer one, a little less clear. Like, I feel like you have to be kind of familiar with hazards, but that's the O with a flame on top of it. That's our oxidizer. What is my skull and crossbones telling me? Danger, poison. Yes, dear, you have a question. It's lethal, yeah. Small amounts can take us out, absolutely. In the middle there, you see a couple little test tubes pouring over what looks to be a piece of metal and a hand. That is a corrosive. What about a cylinder in that triangle? It's under pressure, yeah. My little friend there, the kind of the silhouette of the man with the crackling, that's human health effects. Down at the bottom, we see an upside down fish, a tree, and like a water line in the background. That's an environmental hazard. And then one of probably my second favorite is the exclamation point. I feel like there were all these other hazards and they were like, man, they really don't fit in these other buckets. So we're just gonna throw an exclamation point on it and put them in there. So in that one, you're gonna find everything from respiratory irritant to dermal sensitization, right? It's just kind of a hodgepodge, frankly. So those are the hazard communication pictograms. How many people have seen these before? That's good, about half. Good, you're gonna take the test, so you better be taking notes here. Okay, oops, did I miss one? Okay, let's talk about permits really quick. How many types of pesticide permits are there? I heard 2. Anybody want to challenge that or agree? No, there's 3. 3 different types. Okay, there's an operator ID. So if you never want to use restricted materials on your property, you're not concerned about getting certified yourself, you can actually go into the Ag Commissioner's office and permit your ground under an operator ID. So you can still purchase pesticides, but they cannot be restricted materials, right? No certification needed. The second level up is pest control business only permit. So that permit says, yes, occasionally I need to use restricted materials on my property. I'm not the applicator. I'm going to hire a licensed and registered pest control business, and that person will take possession of the California restricted material, and that person will come out and do the spray work for hire on my property. And you will not take possession of those products, so you cannot store them in your pesticide storage shed. And then last but not least, probably why you're all here, is the restricted materials permit, which requires an individual to be certified, right, in order to obtain that permit. And then in that case, restricted materials can be used on your property, you can purchase them, you can store them, you can apply them, okay? Not meant to be a trick question, but I think these are just like some of the good basics for you to have before you go into this test. And then a PUR, here we go, more acronyms. What is a PUR? Pesticide use report, ding, ding. All right, for growers, when do those bad boys have to be turned in? Once a month, by the 10th day of the following month, absolutely. And are we just reporting California restricted materials, or are we reporting everything? It's everything, yeah. So NOIs are for notice of intents for California restricted materials, but our pesticide use reports is every product that we used on our farm, and it includes rights-of-way applications, right? So if you're doing fence line work or driveway or things like that, they actually have what they call a non-ag pesticide use report, and they're asking you to report that product as well. For pest control businesses, so folks that do spray work for hire, right, they're getting paid, they actually have 7 business days to turn in that paperwork. And they should be providing you, the grower, a copy of all of that. So in the case of what they call a 109 inspection, where the ag commissioner comes out and audits your paperwork, so you're not actively spraying, but they want to look at your training records and all of that, those are going to be documents that they're going to ask to see. Okay, they're going to want to make sure that your NOIs jive with your pesticide use reports, and that if you are hiring somebody to do the spray work, that they're giving you a copy of all that information. And then the last little note here on this slide is about field posting. So in 2015, worker protection standard at the federal level had a facelift. And in order, again, for DPR to be in compliance with the feds, we rolled out changes. They became effective in 2017, and then the final bit of them in 2019. And one of the things that came out of this was this language around California field posting requirements. So there's 2 ways now that we learn whether or not a field needs to be posted. The first one is if the label calls for it, right? If the label says you must post this field, then you all know you must post this field. The other kicker is if the REI, restricted entry interval, is greater than 48 hours, we need to post the field. So it may not be language on the label, right? If the label may not say posting is required, but you reviewing that label prior to application like you do, right? You're going to look at that REI. If it's greater than 48 hours, you're going to post the field, okay? So you might see that come up as a test question. I'm going to pause for a second. Do I have any questions so far? Everybody's very quiet. Okay. Chapter 5 is talking about environmental hazards. I took this pictogram straight from the text. I really like it because I think it really embodies all that we consider before we go out to spray, right? We've got, are we going to have a rain event? What's our wind speed? Are we going to, is the temperature really high, are we going to stop spraying because now the pesticide isn't going to be as effective? What's my application equipment? Am I using a nozzle that's below and behind me on a spray boom and is going down versus an aerofan application, right? Because I'm trying to get into the canopy of the orchard. What's my soil type? Do I have a heavy soil that might encourage runoff? Do I have a sandy soil that might encourage leaching? Am I spraying near a waterway? Right? There's all of these things that we kind of innately think about before we go out and spray that now in this curriculum, they're asking us to really think that process through. So some of the things, all right, continuing on with environmental hazards, are empty containers. So we're mixing and loading. I finish up using a 2.5 gallon container. What do I do with it? We rinse it. How many times? 3 times. Only 3? More if needed, right? So 3 is actually the minimum. They want us to rinse at least 3 times, but if there's still residue in that container, they want us to, do it a couple more times as needed. And then where does my rinse-aid go? Back in the tank, right? That stuff's expensive. We don't want to waste it. Let's get it in the tank and use it out. I know it wasn't always the practice, and I came across many mixing loading areas that were very sterile soil because for so many years that rinse-aid had been dumped on the ground, right? Not what we want to do. We want to make sure that it goes into our tank and it's being sprayed out onto the field or orchard that it's appropriate for. Now, a few minutes back, we just looked at the hazard communication system. We saw all of those diamonds, right, with the hazard listed in the middle. That's the global program. But here I'm showing you another one with a little B in there. What do you think that's telling me if I come across it on a label? Hazardous to bees. So within the pesticide regulatory system, we have created our own hazard communication pictogram, and it's the bee. And that's telling us that this product is harmful to bees. Now, as an industry, I've seen just in my tenure changes in how we apply things when bees are in the orchard, right? What is now a standard practice for application when bees are present? Yeah, we're doing it when the bees aren't out, right? We're watching those bee flight hours. We're not spraying when those little guys are being active. They're working for us. We want to make sure they stay alive. Yeah, we're changing the way that we spray, and frankly, we're changing the tank mix, right? We're not mixing things together in the way that we used to when those little guys are in the field. All right, Chapter 6, Human Hazards. So I have some silhouettes here. There are 4 ways in which a pesticide can enter our body. Through our skin, it can be ingested, we can breathe it in, or through our eyes. Okay, the 4 different ways. What do you think the most common route of exposure is? Skin, I heard it up here. Excellent. Yeah, it's our largest organ, right? It's the most exposed part of our body. It is the most common way that we have an exposure. How do we protect our skin during application? Proper PPE, right? Long sleeve shirt, long pants, shoes plus socks. That's like the bare minimum that we see on labels. And then when we get into other types of products, maybe a little more toxic, maybe we're talking about an employee applying, we'll see the requirement for coveralls. Okay, I always get questions when I talk about ingestion. You know, Anna, who's eating pesticides, right? And in some cases, it's accidental ingestion, right? For example, I work for you, there's a product I'm using in your field, it's working very well, and so I think to myself, you're not gonna mind, right? Joe's not gonna care if I just take a little bit home. Thanks, Joe, for not paying attention. I'm just gonna pour a little bit off into my container, and I'm gonna take it home. And I'm gonna, mix it into my home and garden stuff, and I'm gonna use it because it's been super effective at work. And I don't know about you guys, but I come home and I have this like landing pad where I just dump all my stuff, right? My laptop for the day, my purse, my lunchbox, and my little nosy kids, all 3 of them, are like, hey Mom, what do you got going on in here? And if it looks like something fun to drink, like a Gatorade or something like that, they're gonna take a swig. And that's exactly what has happened. And it's resulted in, unfortunately, deaths. And DPR actually has a code that says you cannot put pesticides into a food or beverage container because of this happening. But that is really the most common way that people are ingesting pesticides. It's why we have the changes to the paraquat label that we have. Is not so much in California, but across the United States, they were having accidental ingestion, and that triggered the change for that chemical. Now, we talked about prevention for skin wearing PPE. Obviously, the prevention for ingestion would be don't eat or drink a pesticide, right? What about respiratory protection? What do we do to protect ourselves from breathing in a pesticide? We wear a mask, right? We wear a respirator. Depending on the product that we're using, the level of respirator may change, right? We have everything from an N95 to a full face respirator to, in some cases, an air supplied respirator. We use SCBAs. And then last but not least is eye protection. What do we do to protect ourselves? Goggles, safety glasses. I like to tease, gang, while inspecting, I saw a lot of safety glasses protecting hairlines and not eyeballs. Do you know what I'm talking about? They pull them up, they wear them on their head. Okay, it's not going to do you any good. PPE has to be worn in the manner in which it was intended in order for it to protect you. And last time I checked, we're not replacing any eyeballs yet, right? I think they're working on it actually. But you want to make sure that you keep your eyes safe while you're applying. So if those are the ways that pesticides can enter our body, then the next logical question is, okay, Anna, what happens if I have an episode in which I have an exposure? What are the first aid procedures? Right? And there are some general first aid procedures. For skin, it's going to be rinsing with soap and water, right? And taking off any contaminated clothing. Now, when you think further into the regulations and you start looking at what DPR is requiring for decontamination kits, it makes sense, right? They want us to have water, they want us to have soap, they want us to have single-use paper towels, and they're asking us to have an extra set of coveralls so that if I get something spilled on me, I'm able to take off what I'm wearing that's been contaminated, I can rinse off in the moment, I can put on a pair of clean coveralls, and I can get somewhere where I can take like a true shower. right? So not that I'm a fan, believe me, gang, of all of the laws and regulations that we have to follow, but when it comes to personal protective equipment and decontamination supplies, it's your first defense of either warding off exposure or reducing exposure if you've had an incident. And so in those cases, I will say as an inspector, I had no problem writing people up. If I had growers who weren't supplying PPE and decon for their employees, for me, that was a no-brainer because that's their first line of defense when it comes to exposure. So for skin, soap, water, single-use paper towels, we're going to rinse, take off contaminated clothing. For ingestion, unfortunately, there is not a, there isn't just a standard first aid procedure for this because it's very specific based on the chemical that you're using. So in some cases, the chemical label will say induce vomiting, or it will say don't induce vomiting. It'll say drink water, don't drink water. That one is very label specific. For respiratory, really the first aid procedures is get that person to fresh air. Okay, so if I'm laid out in a greenhouse and you come across me, are you going to come running in to save me? I see a head shaking no. How come? You don't care if I live or die? No. What's the basic thing that they teach you in like first aid CPR? Protect yourself first. Yeah, you got to assess the situation because if you come in and running to save me, you're not Superman. You could be overwhelmed with whatever it was I was breathing, right? So we're going to assess the situation and then, of course, do what we can to get that person to fresh air. And then for our eyes, it's going to be 15 to 20 minutes of flushing, okay, active flushing. Now, if I get something in this eye, am I going to flush this way? No, why not? It's going to run into the other eye. Now, some of you might be sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, Anna, do you think we're morons? No, I don't think you're morons. However, in an emergency, sometimes our logical thinking goes out the door, right? And so if every time I do this presentation, I remind my audience to flush away from their good eye, my hope is that if there was ever an emergency, knock on wood, that you don't have one, that you would remember that instinctively, okay? So let's talk a little bit about signs and symptoms. There are 4 categories: acute, chronic, sensitization, and delayed. When I say acute, what do I mean? Right now. Every time I did an inspection on methyl bromide, I got a headache. Was there a level of exposure there? Absolutely. I would walk away with a headache every time. Chronic would be small exposures over a long period of time, right, where you could find yourself with some sort of chronic illness down the road. Sensitization, I like to think of it as an allergic reaction to a pesticide. Okay, your body chemistry is not jiving with the chemistry of the pesticide, and you may break out in a rash, and I can use the product in the same way, following all the rules, and not have the same reaction. I had a coworker, also an inspector. She would get itchy anytime she was around goal, and we could be standing in the same spot, following the same safety protocols, and I would have no issue, and she would get itchy every time. It was just how her body chemistry was reacting to that product. And then delayed. So say you're out spraying all day, maybe you weren't super great about washing your hands, right, before and after eating, drinking, smoking, chewing gum, using the restroom, and you get home that night, you eat supper, and you're sitting there watching your favorite show, and all of a sudden your tummy is a little grumbly. And that maybe lasts for a few hours. That could be a sign. Now, I want to pause right there because I want to make this very clear. I'm not saying that because you have a headache or an upset tummy that you've had pesticide exposure, right? Signs and symptoms of pesticide exposure mimic a whole lot of other things. For example, the flu, right? Similar. I always like to tease, mostly my guys in the room, maybe you partied a little too hard at the gala last night, you're feeling a little under the weather today, right? Those signs and symptoms, very similar to pesticide exposure. Morning sickness can mimic pesticide exposure, okay? So the signs and symptoms of pesticide exposure are not exclusive to pesticide exposure. So when you're doing your handler training for your guys or gals who are handling pesticides or working in an area where pesticides have been used, I want to emphasize with you, of course, go over the signs and symptoms, right? Headache, dizziness, nausea, skin rash, irritated eyes. You want to run through all of those things, but you also want to stress, be mindful of your environment, okay? Are you applying pesticides, or are you working in an area where pesticides have been used? Or has your family had the stomach flu all weekend and it's Monday morning and now you're finding that you're not feeling so hot? Okay, what I don't want is a Chicken Little situation where folks think that every time they don't feel well that they've had a pesticide exposure. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, the most common route of exposure is through the what? Somebody whispered it. Skin. Good job, gang. All right, personal protective equipment. As I mentioned, no problem writing people up when they were not being provided PPE. It is frankly, the last thing that we can do to protect ourselves. From a safety perspective, there are 3 things that I ask myself when I'm assessing the hazards in a workplace. The first one is, can I eliminate the hazard? Okay. Now, in terms of pesticide, that would mean we don't use them anymore. Probably not super practical, right? So I'm not going to eliminate the hazard in that case. Can I put in some sort of engineering control that can reduce the exposure? Absolutely, and we've done it. You're doing it when you apply pesticides from an enclosed cab. You've literally created a barrier between you and the hazard, and you have protected yourself dermally from the pesticide, right? So from an enclosed cab, it's why we have a little caveat in the regulations that say you actually don't have to wear dermal PPE when applying from an enclosed cab. You still have to wear the respirator, right? Because the cabs aren't quite to the sophistication yet. I think they'll get there, frankly. But wearing a full face or half face respirator with the appropriate cartridge provides the correct amount of protection, whereas just a vented cab does not. So can we eliminate it? In the case of pesticides, probably not. There's going to be situations where we need to bring in the big guns. Can we have an engineering control? Absolutely. When we apply things from an enclosed cab, we've done that. And then last but not least is personal protective equipment. It's literally the clothing that we wear to keep us away from the hazard. So on my little friend up here, why do I have those hot spots, those red and pink hot spots? Exposure areas, yeah. We're primed for exposure, obviously on our hands, right? And then I have really dark red on our face and in our private area because we are very thin-skinned there, and the opportunity for absorption is very high. It's why I mentioned earlier washing your hands before and after chewing gum, smoking, drinking, eating, and using the restroom. Okay, for you gentlemen out there, if you've been out spraying all day and you go to use the restroom, I do not want you to have residue on your hands and then go into the restroom. You're now touching a part of your body that's very thin-skinned, and the opportunity for absorption is very high. So you're going to wash before and after, okay? I stopped and did an inspection one time on a gentleman. He was using Gold, which is brightly colored, right? And as I approached him, he was at the mix and load area. I said, good afternoon, what are we spraying today, sir? And he turns around and he's covered in orange, right? His Tyvek are just like completely saturated. And then as he whips around completely, I notice he's eating his sandwich. And kind of picture this like, when your kids eat Cheetos and their little fingers are all brightly orange, and then they leave little finger marks on the Wonder Bread because their little Cheeto fingers are all contaminated. This is what this guy looked like, right? So as an inspector, the first thing that's triggered for me is, man, this guy has not been well trained, right? Or he's been really well trained and he just doesn't care. And we need to get folks to a level where they understand the risk at hand so that they're taking the precautions. Not the best scenario, right? His little Cheeto fingers. Personal protective equipment. Again, there's an entire code section that's devoted to this, but breaking it down into just a few bullet points for you, knowing what to wear and when to wear it, right? how to maintain it when it's not in use so that when we go back to using it again, it's in good repair for us. How to clean it so that it can be used again. Some of the PPE that we wear can be used multiple times. Other PPE is designed to be used one and done, right? Folks need to be trained on how to properly wear the PPE. This is where I get into the, safety glasses on the head or the respirator hanging around at the neck. It's not doing any good there. My favorite one, probably the most common, is when you go to the extent of putting the Tyvek on, but then you unzip them halfway and tie them across your waist. Now, all of a sudden, this garment that was protecting you from head to toe is now just protecting you from the waist down. The other thing to think about here is the PPE needs to fit. What happens if you wear Tyvek that are too small and you bend over to pick up that pesticide container? You rip them every time, right? Straight across your bum. They're going to rip. What happens if you wear Tyvek that are too big? I don't have a lot of stage here, but not to be crass, but the crotch ends up landing at your knees, and then all of a sudden, you are walking through the orchard like a penguin, and now the PPE has created a trip hazard, okay? So making sure that we're providing PPE for ourselves and our employees that fit us appropriately. All right, using pesticides safely. So we haven't talked about REI yet. What does that acronym stand for? Restricted Entry Interval. What does that mean? Yeah, perfect. That's like the definition right there. Thank you, sir. Yeah, it's the amount of time that has to lapse before I can go into a treated field without wearing PPE. Now, what happens if I've gone in and I've done an application and oh crud, I've got some sort of, break in the water line and I need to address that? Do I just have to stand there and wait for the REI to expire? Yeah, you can put PPE on. You'll find early entry worker PPE on the label. So you can put that stuff on, you can go in, you can address the issue at hand. We're going to store pesticides in a locked and posted area. It's interesting now that the regulations, you almost have to store pesticide containers that are full the same way that you store empty containers, empty pesticide containers. They want them locked up. They want them posted. The language on the posting is very specific. So before you go out and order a bunch of new signs for yourself, make sure you take a look at that code and that you're ordering signs that have the exact language that DPR is asking for. In general, signs need to be big enough so that they're visible from 25 feet. They're going to be black, red, and white, and they're going to be in both English and Spanish. Transportation. Can I transport pesticides in the same cab as a person? No, we want them in the bed of the pickup, right? We don't want them in the cab where the humans are existing. The county I worked for, we would still sell difascidon, and I would have people pull up in their like sedan and want me to load the bags into their trunk, and we couldn't do that because it's the same shared airspace, right? So we would have to say to them, I'm sorry, you need to go home and get a pickup or something like that so that you can take these home safely. And then mixing and loading. Why do we need to pay careful attention during mixing and loading? Yeah, we're handling the concentrate, right? And not only are we handling the concentrate, but we're up close and personal with it, right? We've got open pesticide containers. We're mixing. We're pouring. The opportunity for splash is higher during that time. And really, the kicker is it's the concentrate, right? It hasn't been diluted in the tank yet, so we want to be really careful during that time. Planning applications to ensure safety. This really gets back to, we've kind of touched on these things. Emergency medical care posting has to be at the use site. Okay, so you can't just have a little posting that says call 911 in a case of an emergency. The code actually says, we DPR, they want you to call out specifically the location in which you would be taken to in case of a pesticide exposure. So it needs to have the name of the hospital, the address, the phone number. You can also have 911 on there, but you can't just have 911 on there. And it's very specific in the language, at the use site. Okay, so not at home in the barn where I'm storing the pesticides, not where I mixed, but where I'm actively applying pesticides. So think about, putting a laminated something in your tractor cab, okay? Or if we're talking about a backpack sprayer, maybe it's like a luggage tag type of thing that's, anchored onto the backpack sprayer. And it needs to be, I just listened to DPR give a presentation like 3 days ago. It needs to be displayed, okay? So that's not like in a binder behind the tractor seat, okay, where I would have to go thumbing through it to find it. It needs to be that I can just approach the application area and see it, okay? So DPR has a very specific definition for displayed. Restricted interval, we talked about. Posting, we talked about. Notification. So before applying any pesticide, you must notify all employees in the farming operation who are working within a quarter mile of the treatment area. And what I've seen growers do here is, have like a bulletin board or something where folks start their day. It's got like a map of the grounds, and then there'll be, information about what fields are being treated or are under treatment, right? They're still actively under that REI. That way there's good communication between the employer, the applicator, and the folks working in and around those areas. And stay tuned, watching DPR's proposed changes for 2024. They are taking text messaging out of the regulation for communication. So prior to, I believe, January 1 of next year, they allowed for text messaging to be used as a way to notify your employees of a treatment area. Now they're saying that doesn't work. It needs to be, some type of system that requires acknowledgement, right? So if you're telling me that something's being sprayed, that there's some sort of acknowledgement for me that I understand that area has been treated. Some signage, again, be sure before you go out and purchase signs that you're looking at the regs and that you're actually getting signs that meet the requirements. And you'll notice here in California, our signs all have what? The skull and crossbones. If you were to look at the worker protection standard, which is the standard that almost every other state follows, it's a picture of a man with his hand up. Have any of you seen that before? Yeah, so if you go into like Nevada or Arizona, you're gonna see the man with the hand. That's our equivalent is the skull and crossbones. And I guess I kind of understand it. The man with the hand is either saying, please don't come in, or he's saying hello. So it's a little bit deceiving, but the ones that we're gonna use here in California are the skull and crossbones. Chapter 9 is application equipment. To be real frank, gang, one time in my entire tenure as an inspector did I write somebody up for faulty application equipment. So this code is all about using equipment in a safe manner that's in good working condition, right? So I had this gentleman one time. He went out to spray for the day. He was on a four-wheeler, just like with a little tank and boom behind him, and he had a cracked hose. And instead of delaying the pesticide application for that day or addressing the cracked hose, he decided, you know what, I'll just get it done real quick. And he tied a rag around the crack and moved into the orchard with his spray boom. What do you think happened when that rag got saturated? Drip, drip, drip. So like the story of Hansel and Gretel, he left me this perfect little, trail to follow. And it was the one and only time that I wrote somebody up for equipment. But this code will address things like your sight gauge. Is it all cloudy or is it nice and clean and you can actually see it? All right, calibration. I am by no means a mathematician. And if calibration is not your strong suit, then tap the people in your industry whose it is, right? Ask your PCA to help you with calibration. What am I talking about when I say calibration? What am I referencing? Yeah, accuracy, putting out the right material per acre, which sounds great, right? I want to use the right amount of pesticide in compliance with the laws and regulations, but more importantly, the right rate to knock down my issue. And I don't want pesticides to go anywhere but my intended target, right? In fact, the definition of drift is pesticides hitting an unintended target, right? We have this code that says protection of persons, animals, and property. Drift is we want to prevent the off-site movement of the product, right? That stuff's expensive. We want it to hit our target area. We don't want it to move. We definitely don't want it to hit a vehicle, a bicyclist. I live in Oakdale, which is the northernmost part of Stanislaus County. We have these beautiful rolling hills of almond trees, and during bloom time, when those trees are so beautiful, what do all the bicyclists want to do? Take rides on those rolling hills. And so what happens to the grower is they're constantly in this state of like, do I need to shut down? Is there somebody coming? And oftentimes in our county, our guys have just made it habit now. They'll have a flagger at the end of the row so they can watch for bicyclists and things, right? The last thing that we need as an industry is a drift case that makes the news, right? We want folks to know that we are using pesticides in a safe, effective way, and we certainly don't want those tools taken away from us. Okay, question 10. Calibration is defined as what you must do before the application to be sure that you are avoiding hazard in sensitive areas, selecting the most effective pesticide to apply in any situation, or applying the correct amount of pesticide to the treatment area. C, ding, ding, ding. I have to make a note here, gang. I just did this presentation last week at Farm Bureau's annual meeting, and for some reason, instead of having the word apply in answer B, I had apple. And somebody called me out on that. So I made sure to fix it before I got here. I was like, I don't need any more apples in my presentation. Using pesticides effectively. So predicting pest problems. You know your ground, you know your orchard better than anybody else. Like I mentioned before, you know your hot spots, you know the season in which you're gonna, see a uptick in pest pressure. Or frankly, we're gonna have a really crazy, weird year like we had this last year, and you're gonna have to work with your team to figure out how to navigate those challenges, because this last year looked like none we've had before, right? Making pesticide use decisions. One of my coworkers, he's farmed with his father-in-law for years, and they're constantly going at it because Tom, my coworker, is applying new thoughts and new practices, and his father-in-law wants to farm by the calendar. On March 15th, we do this, and Tom is saying, Dad, that's not how we do it anymore. Like, we've got insect traps out there, and we're talking to our PCA, and we're talking to our CCA, and we're walking the fields, and it's things evolve, we change. I mean, you all are at this conference, my guess is, because you're getting education and you're learning about new methods. Choosing the right pesticide for the job. Timing, right? We're watching pre-harvest intervals. The last thing we want to do is put something out in our orchard that then changes when we are allowed to harvest. Considering weather. I heard somebody say it earlier, like, I think we got rain coming in this afternoon. Let's make sure we're on the road. We watch that. Drift prevention. So applying pesticides in a manner that helps reduce drift. We know that there are certain pesticides that just naturally like to volatilize and move, right? It's the nature of their chemistry. So being particularly mindful when we're using those products. Considering sensitive areas. We had a case in San Joaquin County, which is just north of where I work. Somebody put out 2,4-D. 2,4-D likes to volatilize, okay? It likes to move. And they put it out. It was not an application within regulations, and unfortunately that 2,4-D moved off-site and hit grapes, and it just smoked the grapes. So not only did that landowner find themselves in trouble with the Ag Commissioner's office, but then civilly there was a case because the way that they applied those pesticides destroyed somebody else's crop. We don't want that happening, right? We want to be kind to our neighbors. We want to apply pesticides in such a way that they're hitting the treatment area and nothing else. Inversion layer. So that's my little pictogram there. On a normal day with regular airflow, it will be the top picture, right? The warmest air will be closest to the Earth's surface. Say you're out doing a spray and the particles will move up and dissipate on a normal day, right? Inversion layer creates like a superhighway for drift. Okay, it's warm air trapped between two layers of cold air. Inversion layers are most common at dawn and dusk. A good sign that one might be occurring is no wind at all, not even a breath. Now, I definitely don't want you out spraying when the trees are shaking like crazy, because that's going to be definitely a situation where we will find ourselves with some drift. But a little breeze is an indicator that we are not in an inversion layer, and hopefully we're not having to combat with that superhighway there. And then protecting non-target organisms, and earlier we gave the example of the changes that we've made as an industry when we have bees in the orchard. All right, pesticide emergencies, so we've kind of touched on this. First aid, fire, spill, you're going to find that specific information in your SDS. And I can tell you, gang, we had a situation in Stanislaus County where a pesticide dealer, right, they sell fertilizers and pesticides, had a circumstance, I believe it was a fertilizer actually, a light bulb sparked and the fertilizer caught on fire. And the fire team got out there, and the first thing, that they asked for was the SDS for the product. Because in some cases you won't just add water, right? That could actually make it worse. And so they were able to read through the SDS and then come up with a game plan to tackle that fire in that warehouse, versus just going in hoses ablazing. May not have been the best thing, but the information will be in your SDS. Couple reminders here on paperwork. We talked about NOIs, 24 hours prior to the application when talking about California restricted materials. Again, be mindful of what your county permit conditions say, because they might require more time, but the code requires 24 hours. Pesticide use reports by the 10th day of the following month. Let's pause and talk about respirators here really quickly. When you begin to use products that require a respirator, you really open Pandora's box in terms of additional requirements. Okay, all of a sudden you need a program, you need additional training, we trigger medical evaluation, we trigger fit testing. So medical evaluation is required prior to the person putting the respirator on for the first time. We all learned what it was like to wear a mask during COVID, right? What happens to your breathing? I heard it. It's hot, it's labored breathing, right? So in some cases, it may not be medically safe for you to wear a mask. And that's why we have the medical evaluation. The actual medical evaluation questions are written into code. So you as an employer, if you're going to use a product that requires a mask, your employee has to be medically evaluated by a doctor prior to wearing a respirator. Now, you are not privy to the information that the employee is filling out in that questionnaire. The only thing that you should be getting back as a owner-operator employer is, yes, it's safe for Anna to wear a respirator, or no, based on her evaluation, she should not be wearing a respirator, okay? So that needs to be done prior to using a respirator. Now, when do you need to do it again? Fit testing is every year. Medical evaluation, I hate that they do this to us, DPR, is if something about that person changes medically that would require a reevaluation. Now, that puts us in a really sticky situation from an employer perspective, right? I can't come up to you and say, hey, Joe, I'm pretty sure you had a heart attack this year. We should probably, do another evaluation. You can't do that, right? What you can do is say, hey, Joe, has there been any medical changes this year that would trigger a reevaluation? And Joe would say to me, yes or no. And that is the extent of that conversation. And if Joe says yes, then I provide him with a clean copy of that medical evaluation, the doctor's appointment, all that jazz, and then we keep the record from the doctor part of our respiratory program, okay? But you are correct, sir, in that fit testing has to happen annually. So fit testing is when we're checking to make sure that the mask actually fits the person who's going to wear it, right? And it is required on everything from an N95 to an SCBA. N95 always kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit, because what do we do when we're done wearing an N95? We throw it away. Whereas a half face or a full face or an SCBA, we're wearing it for a long period of time. It's hopefully being cleaned and stored appropriately in the off time. But fit testing is we're going to make sure that the mask actually fits your face, that we have a good seal, because what I don't want is a mask that's too big or too tight that doesn't fit around your nose or the curvature of your chin, and all of a sudden there's a gap here and you're breathing air that's coming in through that gap versus the canisters, right? So I'm going to pick on some of my friends in the audience who are wearing very lovely facial hair today. Would you pass a tight-fitting fit test? No. Yeah, not going to work, right? So in most cases, you need to be clean-shaven. There are some caveats. If you have like a really tight goatee or a really tight mustache and your mask goes beyond that area of part of your face, you might be okay. But for you, with your great beard and all that, it's not going to work. Now, there are respirators that are loose-fitting and air-supplied, and if you don't want to get rid of your beard, you can go down that option, okay? Okay, so we talked about medical clearance, fit testing needs to happen annually. You're keeping documentation of all of this. There's additional training so that folks know how to wear a respirator, they know how to keep it clean, they know how to store it when it's not in use. And then we touched on this briefly, the medical care posting, right? So planning for a pesticide emergency in advance, having that posted at the use site. And actually the regulation says that I, as the employer, if you've had an exposure, I have to take you to the doctor, okay? And we're supposed to be able to provide a clean copy of the label and then be able to express the situation in which the pesticide exposure occurred. So were they mixing and loading and handling concentrates, or were they out with a diluted formulation in a backpack sprayer and the wind kicked up and it sprayed back on them, right? The doctor's going to want to know that so that he or she can treat, accordingly, and then we're going to let them know what pesticide we were actually handling. All right, so the good news is Anna's done. But I wanted to leave you with just a couple of nuggets here. Growers are passing the new private applicator exam, so that is good news. The feedback that I've heard from my guys and gals that have taken the test is it's similar to the older version. It's 80 questions. You have to pass with the 70%. If you don't pass, don't fret. You have to wait 7 days before you go back and take it again, so not a big problem. There are a handful of questions on the test that refer to a label. So when you go in to take the test, they're going to give you the test packet, a Scantron, and a dummy label, and then hopefully something to write with. And there's going to be questions that ask you to go find information in that label. Take your time, okay? The answers are literally in the paperwork that they gave you. Make sure that you're spending your time on those label questions. Those should be an easy win. The other thing, just kind of going back to test taking 101, if there's a question on the test that says, under what heading do you find personal protective equipment? And you're thinking to yourself, oh crap, I don't remember. Use the dummy label. Go find the PPE and then see what header it falls under. That's the answer to your question, okay? So for some of us, it's been a while since we've taken a test, so try to think back to those old test-taking habits and take your time. I believe you're given up to 2 hours to take it. When we proctored it last week, my guys were between like 45 minutes and an hour and a half that they were knocking it out. And everybody in that class that day passed after taking this test prep course. So get the book, get ready, go in, work with your ag commissioner. They might have some scheduled times that they'd like you to be in versus drop in, because there will be this kind of cutoff time, right? What I envision is a bunch of people going, oh crud, I need to get in and take this test so that I can renew my permit for next year. So get ahead of the game so that you're not at a place where you're not getting the products that you need in a timely fashion. With that, my contact information is up on the board there. Are there any questions? No, because the soil fume is proctored by Department of Pesticide Regulation, and the private applicator test is proctored by the Ag Commissioner's Office. So I guess in theory, you could take it at the same day, but it wouldn't be proctored by the same person. So you'd probably be at one location to do the DPR one and one location to do the private applicator. Yeah, the changes to the QAL and the QAC in regards to fumigation is separate than the changes to the private applicator card. Good question. Yes, ma'am. I don't have a copy of the new book, but it is, I can pull it up on my phone and show you. It's like a college textbook. And I can go back to those QR codes at the very beginning in case you want to scan that. Okay. Okay. Yes. 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 So you can keep aluminum phosphide. Yeah. What they'll probably do, though, is reduce the amount of CE that you need to get to renew it, since your time of having it is shorter. They'll probably drop it down to 4 hours. Well, so here's the kicker. I feel like DPR did not think this through very well when they mapped out this rolling implementation, because what I've noticed this entire year, I have been a CE provider for about 15 years. This year, my attendance was way down because I think what happened is you all are smart and have figured out, Anna, I got to go in and take the test. Why the heck am I going to sit through your CE classes, right? So I think it's one of the negative effects that came out of this rolling timeline, because I think growers aren't taking CEUs right now. But yes, I've had people literally say to me, I'm not going to go to the test because I know, I'm not going to go to the class because I know I have to take the test. But you're spot on in, if you have aluminum phosphide on your permit and you're going into 2024, if you want to use that product in 2024, prior to using that product, you need to successfully pass the PAC and take the rodenticide subcategory. I don't know what every county is doing right now, but I know I have had conversations with my local pesticide deputy, and they will be auditing permits beginning January 1 of 2024 to find out who still has aluminum phosphide on their permit who hasn't yet successfully passed the rodenticide subcategory. And so they're going to be pulling that product off your permit, which means if you're storing it, you're technically in violation. My hope is that there's going to be a grace period there, because this is new to all of us, and January 1 is literally the beginning. So, yeah, any other questions? I think you just keep them as part of your pesticide record keeping, and they would audit. So when they come out and do that 109 inspection, the headquarter inspection, if they see on your use reports that you're using paraquat, then they're going to ask for that, a copy of that training record. Correct. Yeah. Any? Yes, sir.
So I have a QA.
Okay.
And they were saying they're going to drop category A,
They're pulling fumigation. So any existing category that you have that previously had fumigation in it, they're pulling fumigation out, and they're creating 2 new categories as a standalone for fumigation. One for soil fumigation and one for non-soil fumigation. I believe it's L and M. So if you're doing soil fumigation or like commodity fumigation, you'll have to go back and take the exam for those new created categories. And that's through DPR, not your Ag Commissioner's Office.
So after January 1st, I won't be able to use the human talk. But if I don't take that new category test before January 1st, will I lose over there, or they're not going to be in
It's not that the other categories are going away, they're just changing the definitions of those categories. So any category that formerly had fumigation built into it has now been stripped of fumigation, and they created L&M for QALs and QACs. Now, what I have been talking to some growers about is they're not interested in going and taking the test through the state because they're only using aluminum phosphide for rodent control. So what they're doing is, in addition to maintaining just their QAL or QAC, they're going in, getting their private applicator card, and then passing the rodenticide subcategory so that they can use the aluminum phosphide. So they're growers. So they're maintaining both licenses, and they're just saying, to heck with you, DPR, I'm not gonna take your subcategory at the state level, I'm just gonna go into the county and do it. Yep. Any other questions? Well, I'm going to hang out for a little while, so if you think of something that you didn't want to ask while I'm standing here up on stage, that's fine. Thank you for your time and your attention. I know this is the tail end of a long conference, and I appreciate you all coming in and listening to me speak for, gosh, an hour and a half. Sorry about that. Have a great day. Happy holidays, and I'll hang out for a bit in case there's any other questions.